And our staff, thank you for attending and for your help as always. And if there are members of the public that have joined us, you're always welcome as well. We'd like to officially excuse Lieutenant Governor Henderson. She has a conflict, and by the way, I think our director, Alan, is working with you all in seeing if we can't move to a morning schedule. And I think with the results so far of that, it looks like we may do that so that the Lieutenant Governor, as our co-chair, can join us. As is usually the case, I need to read this meeting determination. If nothing else, once COVID is over, I won't have to read these anymore and we can meet live. That will be nice. And by the way, JC, I don't know whether legally I can ever simply reference this because it's attached to our agenda, but for today, I'll read it and we'll comply with the law. The Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board, this is a meeting determination. I, Lowry Snow, co-chairman of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board, have determined that the April 7th, 2021 meeting of the board will be held electronically without an anchor location. This determination is based on the following facts. One, Utah is currently dealing with COVID-19, which has been determined to be a pandemic. COVID-19 is contagious and can be deadly to those who contract it, especially those of advanced age and underlying health conditions. Number two, state and county public health officials encourage residents to limit the size of public gatherings, wear masks, and maintain social distancing in public places. Number three, a majority of agency staff and the members of the board are teleworking to avoid unnecessary contact with others. Number four, the boardroom is insufficient to allow social distancing and reasonably safe accommodation of the board and the public. Number five, the board uses an electronic platform which allows interested parties to view this meeting, hear discussions, and provide written comment. Dated this second day of April 2021. All of that over my electronic signature that I confirm. This reminds me of when you take a flight, you know, they give you those pre-flight instructions and most of them have it memorized. I'll have this memorized in just a couple more meetings. We'll go through it more quickly. So with that,
Representative, is that SB 243 that passed during the session waives that requirement for our board. And so after it becomes effective in law, that will no longer apply.
Well, thanks for that, Alan. And so I think the effective date's coming up in May, so hopefully not too many more times. So with that, I guess the best way to characterize this session that we're going to have today is a work session, or if we're dealing with city councils, it'd be a true work meeting. This continues in a pivotal discussion. It's to discuss the elements from the three planning concepts we reviewed last week and see if we can't move forward with a preferred plan alternative as part of our stage 3 work. Our staff and consultants will take direction from this meeting and will prepare a formal recommendation that we will present to the full board in our regular meeting next week on April 13th. This is, like I said, an important point in our planning process. We begin now to focus on the vision for the site and narrow the options. And as we do so, we're going to be able to concentrate our work with a plan and a concept that hopefully we can all agree on. Once again, recognize Peter from SOM and also Aaron from RC Elco. I say it every time, but again, I want you to know how much we appreciate the expertise and the skill and the experience you bring to it. We rely heavily on those. So with that, Alan, I'd like to turn the time to you to talk a little bit about our agenda today and how we're going to proceed, if that's okay.
Thank you, Representative, and thanks to all of you for participating. It's remarkable to me how committed you are and how much you're helping us accomplish. I thought maybe we'd start with the end in mind and think about the goal for our meeting next week. which is to see if the board can approve a set of recommendations to carry forward and be included in the preferred alternative as we launch into stage 3 of our planning. And to get to that point, we've kind of had a progression. Last week was focused on getting you information based on the analysis that our consulting team has done, some input from our working groups and from the public. Make sure that you had a good factual background and understanding of some of the issues. This week is going to be a lot more about presenting some recommendations to you as a starting point for discussion. And in doing that, we'll have SOM and RCLCO share some recommendations and reasons for those recommendations. Now, they bring a lot of experience and expertise to the table, but at the end of the day, it's the board that has to decide what this site's going to look like and what our priorities are. And so we're turning to you to get some input from you today on really where we ought to be heading. Do you agree with the recommendations that staff has developed? And if not, are there ways that you'd modify those? And so don't feel any pressure to follow the recommendations we've got. This is your show, but we hope that by the end of the day, we could come away with kind of a good sense of where you as board members are relative to these broad planning concepts. So again, we're not at a point of getting into details and saying, all right, an entertainment center ought to include performance venue or an esports arena or something like that. But we do need guidance on kind of the broad planning concepts that we'll talk about today. So looking forward to that discussion and looking forward to hearing from SOM. And I will just tell you, following their recommendations, we're going to conduct a live survey with the board and give you each a chance to kind of go through most of those recommendations and kind of indicate anonymously where you are relative to that. That'll give us a better idea of how we can proceed. So I think with that, that's the overview, Representative.
All right, thank you. So with that, we'll turn the time to our planning team, SOM. Peter.
Great, thanks, Representative Snow. And this will be a two-part presentation with RCLCO. SOM will go first. And we really wanted to just do a quick recap of the concepts. We won't dwell on those. Let me go to a full screen because I know you've seen them now several times. But we will spend a little extra time walking through the recommendations. We have 13 recommendations for you from a planning standpoint. So just a quick recap on stage 1 and 2. And I brought these slides back because I think they're important. The research we did in stage 1 around building innovation districts, and we had 6 key catalysts: an institutional anchor, a unique physical environment, highly amenitized buildings and spaces, and I'm sorry. And a flexible plan that allows for adaptation over time, buildings that allow different types of uses and programming opportunities, and then having some sort of institutional partnership or public-private partnership. So these are really some of the indicators we saw as drivers of innovation districts. We also, over the last month especially, but even before that, have been soliciting input from different stakeholder groups. We don't need to go back through all of those again, but I think some of the key takeaways and suggestions from experts, but also the general public around economic growth, which you can see here, and the innovation key vision element, which you can see here. These are really the two big drivers, I think, of where the project, where the project's origins are, but also where we're going with the programming decisions that we're going to make. And what has emerged from the 6 KVEs are really aspirational statements that we as a design team and hopefully the board agree define the path forward. And I've shown them here on the right-hand side, this idea of a vibrant live-work community, balanced mobility, a new business district, a center of transformative creativity, a hub of regional amenities, and a real benchmark in terms of sustainability, up to 50% reduction in resource use. So these are the high-level aspirations that we've heard about and been refining over the last couple months. Just as a quick reminder, we have the 3 concepts, what we call complete community, and I've highlighted the development area, which Aaron will talk a little bit more about later, 55% for that one. Number 2, the regional hub, a slightly larger catchment area, 50% development area with a significant community park. And then the economic catalyst, which is at 60%. Concept 1 is characterized by 6 distinct districts that are gathered around a hub and have linear connections from an open space standpoint. The land use mix is more or less balanced, but has a slight, it favors residential by about 10% over some of the other concepts. All of the schemes have a mixed use core area. Concept 2, which you see here, was characterized by that long regional trail connection that cut across the site, and also introduced an institutional anchor on the eastern side. But most significantly, it also introduced a larger retail core area and that community park in the northwest corner of the project. In concept 3 was the most aggressive in terms of land development, with about 60% of the land being developed, which correlates with a smaller green space component, about 20%. And this had the most balanced office and institutional program. So it really skews the overall development profile towards office and institutional. So those were the 3 concepts that we have been talking about over the last month or so. And here you see the vertical test fit that we conducted. You can see generally the heights and where the core areas are. So I think from a planning perspective, one thing we want to emphasize today is that all of these are viable concepts, and more than that, they are also different components of them are also very viable. So we can mix and match selected and desired items from each concept. We also, in stage 2, conducted an evaluation of the 3 concepts. And as we discussed before, concept 2 did come out as having the highest score against these 30 criteria. But as we mentioned, we feel that all 3 schemes can be designed in a way that maximizes the performance around these 30 different criteria. We also have received a lot of stakeholder comments from the working groups, and we've summarized them here around development. So one of the comments we heard frequently was more density and taller buildings, that activating the site, making it feel active, making it feel busy, making it feel walkable, density and design did play an important role. And then some comments around residential variety and workforce housing. We also heard a lot of comments on transportation. I think one of the reoccurring ideas and goals here is that we have a balanced transportation network, that this is not a place that's dominated by automobiles, that it presents a different development model for the Wasatch Front. So with the BRT and a bike and pedestrian forward design approach, we feel again that all three concepts can deliver these goals. In terms of open space, what we heard from comments is that the Jordan River Trail connection, what we've been calling the river to range, is something that everyone liked. People also liked the Central Park and the variety of open space that was provided. So the key takeaways by concept are shown here. So concept one on the left, the complete community, the linear recreational greenways that can manage stormwater, the distinct districts. The one in the middle, concept two, the regional hub, the river to range greenway and trail. With the other thing that was people preferred in this one was the main, what we call the main street, which is where the BRT would go through. And then the third option on the right, the economic catalyst. So the idea of higher overall density, higher and increased density, development. And the Central Park also was something that people responded quite well to. So we have aggregated all of these recommendations into, as I mentioned, about 13 recommendations, and I'll just walk through those with you one by one. And again, these are simply planning recommendations for discussion today. It's not meant to indicate a direction. But the first one is what we're calling a mixed-use business core. So the idea of a center that has a sort of a vibrant mixed-use quality to it, not only office, but retail, maybe a hotel, some sort of perhaps daytime amenities. That was very well received. The second one is what we call the Cross-Industry Innovation Accelerator. That's a long title for a pretty simple idea, is that is there a specific place in the plan where we bring companies together to really focus on product delivery and R&D and specific innovation? We think that could occur in the Northeast portion of the plan. Recommendation number three, which our research has told us, and we know anecdotally is an important component, is perhaps a second innovation-focused area, but with an institutional presence. So this is not a corporate-dominated innovation area, but maybe it's more nonprofits, other types of research institutions, and of course universities would have a presence here. The recommendation number four is this very important land use mix of both commercial and residential in approximate proportion to each other. And I think in stage three, we'll do more research on exactly what that proportion should be. But generally, we think it's around 50-50, pretty simple relationship. Recommendation number five, which has to do with transportation and mobility, is this idea of some sort of AV circulator, autonomous vehicle or electric vehicle that links, not only links the districts together, but actually creates and provides a literal demonstration that this is a place where innovation is being developed, and not only that, but it's where technology is being tested and applied. Element number six was this retail and entertainment destination, which really came from concept two, the idea that this could be a slightly larger sub-regional attraction, a place where people from outside this particular project can come and spend an evening, go to a restaurant, spend 4 or 6 hours here, catch a concert. something like that. We think that's a really important ingredient in the land use mix. Recommendation number 7 is the river to range greenway and trail. Now the specific location and configuration of it is something we will refine in stage 3, but the idea of this very clear green connection that goes from the southeast to the northwest and links that river to range is something that was very well received. Number 8, which is for discussion, is the what we're calling the Jordan River Community Park, an idea of a larger community park that is oriented to the Jordan River that provides not only amenities for the people that live and work here, but also the surrounding community. That may have some sports programming in it. We don't want the sports programming to dominate this park, but it could have elements of sports programming here. Number 9 is a central park. Now this is a little bit different than that Greenway idea. So the Greenway idea is more about pathways and movement through the project. The central park is really the gathering place of the project. And the size that is indicated here, we've done some scale comparisons. On the right is the Salt Lake Public Library. So you can see the red rectangle is the size of the Points Central Park. So you can see it's almost as the same size as the Salt Lake Public Library block, including the building and the park. For those of you who've been to New York City, Bryant Park is a famous so it's about the same size as Bryant Park plus the New York Public Library. So that's the size today. We think it could be a little bit smaller moving forward, maybe about 2/3 of this size. Both of these spaces are quite large. Recommended element number 10 is the pedestrian priority zones. This is a concept where automobile traffic would be controlled, perhaps limited in certain ways. But it's really setting aside an area where people can move freely through the project without necessarily coming into conflicts with automobile traffic. So we think this is an important concept for the project. Number 11 is distinct districts and districts that have then their own subcenters. And I think if some of you will recall, we did demonstrate that when you have these subcenters, it does reduce traffic because people can meet their daily needs close to where they work. The benefit of distinct districts is it allows us to program the districts in particular ways, which increases marketability. It also increases attractiveness to industries that like to be adjacent to each other. So we think there's a lot of benefits in this concept. Number 12 is pedestrian linkages to the core area. One of the objectives for the project has always been that, again, it really is a demonstration project in terms of new types of ways to move around. Having a pedestrian and bike network and structure to the plan will really distinguish this place as a unique innovation environment. And then finally, these smaller neighborhood parks. So this would really be a component of the open space plan, but one we think is very important. So along with those district centers, we think there's some clear demand here and appropriateness to create a series of smaller parks that serve the immediate neighborhood in which they're located. So these are the 13 elements that we felt came up over and over again, not only in public comment, but also made a lot of sense in terms of the technical evaluation and scoring that we did. And they seem to really have important benefits to the overall mission of the project. I also just wanted to close quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Aaron. We have created a drawing that actually begins to merge all of these ideas together. So you can see the labeling around the perimeter of the plan here. These are the 13 items that I just talked about. So it is possible to merge these items into one single concept. And of course, the physical layout and design and specifics of how they all interact is something we'll explore in stage 3. But we did just want to demonstrate that it is possible to merge some of these best ideas together. So happy to take any questions on those recommendations at this point. If there are none, I think Erin has a presentation she'd like to make about the economic evaluation.
This is Mayor
questions from the
Walker.
board? Oh, go ahead, Troy.
I just had one recommendation. Baseball park.
Baseball?
Yes.
Great, absolutely.
And
we have space.
Mayor, you're probably not talking Little League, right?
No, I'm talking big league pretzels, hot dogs, and enjoying a game at the integrate that Jordan River Park into a ballpark. I think you could. That's my one suggestion. I'd like to see that element of entertainment there.
Great.
That level.
Other comments or questions?
I'll repeat here. Peter, I like a lot, of course, that the number 5, the micro mobility that I keep talking about.
Yeah.
Is that that could be incorporated in all 3 concepts, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. All 13 we see as being applicable to any concept, right? We've tried to disconnect them from specific concepts. Yep. Yeah, definitely, Steve.
Peter, I may have missed this as we went back through this. You had some graphics, try to get an idea how large that central park area is. But
yeah,
can you tell me, as we have it modeled there, approximately how many acres that would be?
Yeah, so right now it's 500 feet by 900 feet, so it's about 10.3 acres.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've been to Dallas, but they have a new park called Clyde Warren Park, which is sort of a central park now for their downtown. That's about 5.2 acres. So we're recommending somewhere between 5 and 7 acres.
Okay.
Yep.
And then Mayor Walker, at some point along the way, and probably downstream, would be a discussion whether these would be public city parks, whether they would all be, or some would be maintained as part of an association. I don't know, that's a discussion to have yet, but I really like the greenways and parks.
And we have had some informal conversations with the county, Salt Lake County, and they are interested in helping with the construction and management of a larger park if we go in that direction.
This would be the Jordan River Park would be a significant amenity, not just for this development, but beyond, especially with all that we've been trying to do with the Jordan River and with the trails and some parkways along the way. So that's very nice.
Peter, this is Troy Walker again. Sorry. Could you go back to your sort of integrated concept, the one that
Sure.
That slide.
You can see it?
What? Yeah, no, one back, the one with the layout that where you had that one. So in that particular layout, where's the transit? It's the transit. So the micro, I see your micro circulator. Your transit's coming through that yellow line. Is that what we're kind of where?
No, that's the regional trail.
Okay.
So the BRT would be here, where my this pink draw concept is,
Okay.
or line.
And then of course we intend that bridge going over across the freeway. That's going to be a multimodal. That's going to have the bike pedestrian connection. That's what
Yes.
you're envisioning, correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I love the river to range. I love the Port of Rockwell, the Jordan River Parkway Trail, especially if we're going to do some kind of park, baseball field park, Major League Baseball field, XFL football park down there. Like baseball and stuff down by the river. As long as we're able to connect, there is no safe connection for a cyclist really now to get from the Jordan River Trail, which goes 100 miles from Ogden to Provo, to the over to our east side Port of Rockwell Trail.
Right.
I just want to make sure that everything's integrating that a bike lane, pedestrian walking, even a moving sidewalk if possible, as part of the be able to move people, to those two, between those two trail heads or those two big, nice trail connections that we have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the Jordan River Trail is critical to the, as both a commuting route and as an amenity for not only this project, but also the entire Draper community. So
I envision being able to ride from my house down the Port of Rockwell Trail, go across that bridge, meet Lowry at the baseball park, have a hot dog on him while we watch Major League Baseball.
All right. That sounds great.
I like every part of that, including the hot dogs, once you know.
So the circulator would, we don't know the exact route right now. We're going to look at a couple options in stage 3, but the most obvious one would be to do something like that, where it touches every district together and also runs next to the BRT. So you get that very literal connection to the BRT. So it'll be something like that.
If you go with that larger Central Park space, which I'm kind of warming up to, I can kind of see what I guess we're going to go a little taller on buildings then, probably to accommodate that bigger park space. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, Aaron will get into that a little more. Right now, this drawing shows about 56% developable. I think Aaron would prefer to go a little higher than that, which we can do. If the Jordan River Community Park gets significantly smaller than what you're seeing here, then the county would be less inclined to help with it, either by funding or by managing. But and that's part of the trade-off we'll talk about today is, where do you want to, which way do we want to go on that?
When do you anticipate that park being, obviously this is, the biodiversity of this particular site is Russian olive trees, sagebrush, and thistles. Are you anticipating that being like a green watered park, like a not more of a desert scape, an actual grass type park? Is that what you mean?
I think we'd like to see definitely native landscapes here. However, I do think there's room for ball fields, a baseball field, and in some earlier drawings you might have seen we actually put some fields on there. They're not. We have plenty of room here, right? So a football field is about, maybe something like this big. So we think it can be a combination of both native landscaping, stormwater management areas, mowed green lawns, maybe some irrigated play fields, and a baseball element.
just keeping in mind the concept of the water situation. The governor's already put us into this year into this, serious category emergency on water. I mean, we have a big park north of this, Galena Park, that it's really, really expensive to water.
Yeah.
And I'm working on making sure we get reuse connection into this, so that if you do want to do, and I think it's fine, but we may have to get water with reuse water type of we have to plan that concept in to be able to afford it.
Yeah, and that's part of our sustainable strategy, is to use gray water or some sort of secondary water to irrigate. But we would really recommend to absolutely minimize any irrigated areas and just only do it where you absolutely need it. I think it's going to be a dry summer for everybody this year.
I know it is down here, so
Yeah.
good point, but it's going to be probably statewide. Other questions or comments for Peter? Peter, I can't tell you how pleased I am with the work that's being done. High level of professionalism. It really looks great.
Great.
Won't take any time now, but curious as to, not curious, but I think that to the extent that we've had involvement from Salt Lake County and their interest, taking interest in this, that's a great thing. So thanks for coordinating with those folks.
Sure. Yeah.
So is the plan now we'll turn time to Aaron? Is that correct, Alan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Pete. So this obviously looks different than what we were just looking at. Instead of really pretty pictures, we're going to talk a little bit about the high-level economic analysis that our CLCO has been working on to complement the planning concepts. And this is really another tool for thinking about what we've been showing in visuals. And our role here is not to say one of these as a whole is better or different than the others, but really to start to think about how the elements of these different concepts start to contribute to their eventual feasibility, and the ways in which that might create some thinking around the trade-offs of some of these different elements. And so, we've talked a little bit about this idea of modeling out the project before, but really, what I want you guys to take away is that we've had a revenue and a cost model, running in the background on some hypothetical numbers, informed by the market and our expertise, but not yet scaled to the site. And now that we have some of these preliminary concept plans, what we've done is we've really integrated the programs that Pete's been sharing, how much land we're really developing, how much park space we have, and some estimated costs that his team and Great Basin have provided on some of these different buckets, so that we really can start to understand what's actually happening in these scenarios, and what we might need to change as we go forward, or play with in different scenarios to see how the recommendations play with the feasibility and get to a project that really works for everyone. So we flip.
You want to go to the next one?
Yes, please. Sorry. So just to help you all conceptualize the real estate side of this for a second, when we look at these plans, you obviously see lots of roads and you see lots of green space, and we're creating these nice new sites that people can develop on. And when you look around at the sites that are being developed in the region today, most of them already have a lot of that infrastructure around them, right? You don't necessarily have people building, large new parks and central parks as part of their development projects. And that's not to say that they shouldn't be, but those people live in a little bit different reality than this site does, because we're going to have to build some of that infrastructure to start with. And so we started to think about, 3 different buckets of costs. Like there's regional costs, things that the site influences but may not be on site, or maybe components that we're sharing in the cost of, and things like the BRT, or some Some road improvements in the immediate area to the site might be part of that. There's what we're calling master infrastructure, which is if you think about that the big north-south road running through the site, as well as the ring road that Pete was highlighting. Those are the major roads and the sewer and the water infrastructure, underneath them that really allow us to start developing the site and to get into what's right now a really big piece of land. And then there's also additional land development costs, right? When you work with the developer in the future, they're going to have to build some smaller roads and parks and other components within those larger sites that we're creating to actually get to those development paths. And so at the end of the day, let me annotate a second, right? At the end of the day, you start with, these additional buckets of costs that we're building up, right? So you can kind of see how this regional cost line pulls across to this piece underneath the master infrastructure, right? And so at the end of the day, we're trying to build up this understanding of what it costs to create the site. And then we're comparing that against the land value that's created from the parcels that we did create, what you could sell those to somebody to build on. And, what we want to see and what we hope to see is this additional increment that's left at the end, right? Because that means that there's more value than the cost. And what I can tell you about the three scenarios that we're looking at right now is we think that there's ways that all three of them are feasible and create this increment. And so we feel pretty comfortable with Pete's recommendations saying that with a few tweaks here or there are things to consider in the next phase that any of these underlying planning concepts are concepts that we can get behind from a market and that we can get developers interested in. And use that land value if we decide to do it to cover the cost of the infrastructure development. We flip the next slide. The other thing that I think is really helpful to consider when we start to compare concepts is not just, do we create land value and how much they cost, but what are some of the other things that are generated for the state and other economic impacts. So land value is one option. At the end of the day, the economic impacts of taxes and property value and retail spending and new jobs and income is actually going to be much larger than any land value you create, even if we figured out how to build skyscrapers here. And so we're thinking through these scenarios not just from a land value perspective, but also from the question of when you look at something like concept 2, which is the one that, if you remember, had that really nice emphasis on the retail core, right? It has actually like twice as much retail as some of the other scenarios. And so you really do see that the retail spending generated, by the options on site is nearly twice as large as it is in concept 1. Actually, it's more than twice as large. And when you compare the different mix of uses and getting to a sense of what the property value would be at the end of the day if we built out this whole site, one of the things you can see is that as we do push away from some of the lower density residential that's included in concept 1, you get to somewhat higher total property value.
Is it Yelp or what is it that like gives ratings that they're good or whatever?
I might need to mute somebody. And that translates to property taxes as well as the retail spending translates to sales taxes. And I'm just going to clear these annotations. And the other number on here I think to pay attention to is, when we talk about concept 3 as the one really driving economic development and serving as a new economic core for the region, that is the scenario that has the most jobs, even though it actually still has quite a lot of housing in it as well. So we flip to the next page. We wanted to share a few high-level conclusions for you all to keep in mind as we talk more specifically today, I think, about what planning concepts and recommendations you like and how to think about those. All of these concepts that we're showing, build out in a similar horizon, right? These are 25, maybe 30-year projects in terms of the overall, phasing and pace of development. These are not things that we're going to pop out of the ground tomorrow and have finished in 5 or 10 years. And so, we're really thinking about these from, what is the place that we want to create over the long term and how do we get there? We shared some preliminary infrastructure and site costs with you all a few months ago when we talked about the business plan. And, the costs that we're looking at today are a little bit lower than our original estimate, which is great, right? We've confirmed that that was a reasonable number to have looked at, and that there might actually be some additional increment available, to play with compared to what we were looking at. The other thing to keep in mind here is that the costs of these different scenarios doesn't actually vary that much, concept to concept. There's some differences in how many acres you develop of real estate, the quantity of open space, and some of the specific features and concepts. But the actual, physical urban design and, where exactly does this road go versus that road? Do we have this type of linear park or that type of linear park? In general, those things are somewhat cost neutral between scenarios. We can pick the things we like from a planning perspective. The one thing that I would highlight for you all as a difference is, when we talk about the sports park concept, which is not the Major League Baseball stadium, and let's put that in a bucket because we could have another 2-hour conversation about how we would do that. When we think about this sports park, which was this idea of a lot of ball fields and maybe 50 acres, that really does have an impact on the value for concept 2. If we kept it as we initially showed it in that concept. And part of, I think, why you hear Pete starting to propose some different ideas, maybe this is a regional park, maybe we really can share some of the costs with Salt Lake County. Maybe there's some other uses for it, like stormwater, is because I think we, when you look at it as if we just paid for it as a sports park, there are maybe some things that, make that less desirable in concept 2, because we're paying more for the cost of that space than I think what we're getting out of it for the development. There might be other reasons to pursue it, but we would want to think about that almost as a standalone project as opposed to an amenity for our site if we decided that was an important element. And the overall takeaway is that I think the land values, as we start to look at them, are actually pretty similar per what we'll call net developable acres. So that's if you just drew a box around all of the parcels that you imagine being developed at the end of the day and left the rest of the land, that's infrastructure and parks, those are the net developable acres. And when you compare that by scenario, it's not that different. We're generating about the same value. So we've translated these into a few recommendations that we think are helpful for you all to consider, as we think about these planning concepts. One of them is that we do think the site should include an anchor and institutional use as a component of the program. And, that really is the driver of that economic development program in concept 3. One of the things that we think we'll need to take a look at in the next phase of work is whether that's, its own standalone district or whether it's part of this broader innovation community and just a piece of the program. So that's an open question, but we would really recommend that this does have a positive, economic impact on the overall site. The second thing that we'd encourage you all to think about is, going back to the sports park, that park, as we were showing it originally, is, detrimental to the economic success of the site, right? It's a high cost item. It takes up a lot of land and it doesn't necessarily generate a significant additional value for that concept. And so we would want to think, if you all really like that idea, we'd want to think about other options for how we make that park economically successful. Maybe Salt Lake County is part of it. Maybe there's a private operator. Maybe we make it a little bit smaller. So, it's not a no-go, but I would just keep in mind that there is a trade-off to deciding that we would have that particular, piece as part of a final proposal. The other couple things are really focused more on the real estate development. So, we think that something in the 55 or 60% of the site really should be driven by real estate development. And that's based on our modeling on how much revenue we need to generate to support the open space goals and the site-wide infrastructure costs. And one thing we will want to explore is, how do we increase some of the densities in the next phase so that, maybe there are some places we can have a little more green space or we have a little more flexibility going forward. But we do think we need a minimum level of, real estate development activity on the site in order to pay for all of the other cool things that we'd like to do and that we're showing in the recommendations. I would also consider that, we talk about these autonomous circulators in the BRT. strategies that reduce parking needs will have a significantly positive impact on the land value and on the economics of the overall project. And we can think about those as dollars, or we can think about those as opportunities to spend more money on amenities and other features of the site that we'd like to invest in. And so either way, thinking about those mobility strategies really do have a payback for us if we can build less parking. And maybe the last thing I would highlight is just the idea that from an economic perspective, the land use mix, how much office, how much residential, when we're thinking about multifamily especially, doesn't actually have a big impact on the economics of the project. So I think we can really think about the balanced land use mix, or the right mix of uses that drive the activity we want to have on site, and really will create that successful mix of uses and mix of activity, and not worry so much about the question of is this going to be detrimental to the site's feasibility. But we would really encourage you all to start thinking about economic impact as probably an equally important metric to land value and to the economic feasibility. As long as we can ensure that the development is at least cost neutral, right? We've covered our costs. And so I'm happy to take some questions, take some thoughts. I know this was kind of a lot to start to process, but we wanted to kind of share these ideas as we start to get into the discussion about trade-offs and what we really value as part of these recommendations on site.
Questions for Aaron?
I have one, Aaron. Terrific.
Well, what are you doing?
This is the first time that I've heard
You got your what?
maybe I hadn't paid attention to 25-year build out. Let's just use that
Your
number.
taxes.
But how do you really project that? I mean, that's incredible to me, that because you're assuming that we're not going to have a war, that we're not going to have another pandemic, that the economy stays strong the way that we have in Utah, and there's no guarantees with any of those things. So how do you help me with that? You see where I'm going with that?
Definitely.
I mean, wow, 25 years.
Does that sound short or long to you?
It sounds really long.
Yeah.
It sounds really long. I thought that maybe we could get to build out in 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time. I mean, nearly every project that I work on day to day includes an element of forecasting market demand and market absorption. So, we're looking at job growth patterns. We're looking at historical absorption trends. We're thinking about, how the national economy and how the regional economy is likely to be impacted by things like COVID-19 and how that's going to impact space use going forward. So we're integrating all of that into forecasts for different land uses in the region. I'm thinking about how much of that activity happens in the point of the mountain area, as well as, what a reasonable capture at the site is. And so, it does sound like a long build out, but, this is a big site. And the way that you build out big sites fast is you build a lot of single family housing. And so that's kind of an open discussion for this group. If the longer build out timeline scares you and feels like a real risk, the trade-off and the way that you mitigate that is by building more things, more diversity of product, and more things that are in really, really high demand in the short term. And so, we feel pretty comfortable that, thinking about this in a 25-year horizon is pretty reasonable based on the size of the site and what we've seen with other projects. But it's partly why we're really thinking hard about the costs and the economics, so that we can get the site broken down into pieces and make sure that we can actually phase the costs and phase the activity in a way that just allows us to adapt as we start to see what really happens with the market, and maybe we change the market, right? Maybe the market comes to us in a way we haven't predicted or expected, and this is a plan set up so that we can accommodate that and move more quickly if we want to.
Well, thanks for the explanation. It's a lot for someone who's not in your space. I mean, this is what we're paying you to do, right? So
if I could just tag on to that a little bit. This is Steve. One of the things we talk a lot about density and trying to push density on this site. And so one of the things we have to realize is that the denser we go, and I think right now we're assuming kind of a moderate density profile, not super high, not super low, but the density actually slows down absorption. That's one of the things that Erin was saying, is that the fastest way is to do, low density tract housing. I think she's not suggesting that in any way. She's just using that as an example. But as we push density, you just think about it. I mean, we're putting more square footage on the land on an acre, but it doesn't mean that the square footage is being absorbed any faster by the market. So it just takes longer to go through a higher density project than a lower density project. So,
can I make a comment as well? I think that Representative Handy hit on what I think is the number one thing that needs to be decided to be able to make decisions on this project, and that is, what is the expectations of the term of this project, because that really derives all the decisions, and including what type of ownership we may or may not have. And I think that that's what has to be determined. And as a group, we could make all the great decisions in the world and present something to the legislature. And if there are 100 members that have different expectations on how long this should take to develop and how long should we be basing our financial data and payback and investment and all that on, if everybody has a bunch of different opinions, how do we ever get to a decision? I guess I'm asking the question to Representative Snow, because I think this is really the key, really probably the most key decision.
Well, I think those are excellent questions, and to some extent, the legislature may not have understood the term, but the creation of this board and all of the authorities given in the original legislation are in place. Now that could all be changed, but in my opinion, we need to move forward and at least get to the point where we have some idea of absorption rates and what this term is, and we can make that disclosure. But the fact of the matter is, the state has some land that you've owned for decades. So owning and holding land isn't something new. Owning and holding land and keeping it available for development or overseeing development may be new, but I believe that it still can be done. I'm not suggesting that it's not an issue or try to diminish it, but it is something that we've bitten off, and we're in the middle of it, and maybe not in the middle, we're still at the beginning, but we're moving forward based on what has been laid out in the statute that we're working under. But again, it's a fair question, but it also speaks to the importance of this foundational work that I keep saying that we've undertaken, which is with our consultant teams to help us get it in the position where, if the legislature decides 3 years from now, sell everything that's left, we at least have a plan and a model to sell. We're not selling 700 acres of raw ground with, what did you say, Mayor, olive trees and something else? And that's worth a lot. And we also have something to sell in terms of entitlements, which we have the ability to control to some extent going forward too. So those are important discussions, but I don't think that should stop us in our tracks. Let me just say this too. I'm involved in a project down here, and when I say involved, it's legal counsel. I'm not an equity owner. Significant project. We are now beyond 20 years. It's primarily a residential, and it is nothing compared to what this project is in terms of its size and scope. But it's not unusual, Representative Handy, for a large development, even 20% of this size, to take a fairly long period of time, especially a mixed use development. You're not coming in and building the whole thing out in houses. It's a very intricate design plan, and it will take a period. Although I think with the growth, population growth that Utah's having, and given the location of this, I wouldn't be surprised if you see something a little quicker than those projections. That's just my thinking on it.
Well, that's my thinking too. Let me just say this. You Utahns, and Alan, you'll be a good one on this, and Jim, you take from Thanksgiving Point area north, the explosion in growth there, and that's taken about 10 years. That's taken about 10 years. And that, you know, you look at all of that commercial development, all of that business development, and there's housing in there too, but not as much. I mean, I'm still, my mind is blown by the 25-year projection. I'm just gonna say that it's not blown that much. I'm still functioning, but it's
well, let me just say it goes.
But look, you compare that from Thanksgiving Point north to see what has happened there, and I think that what do I know? I mean, but I think that we can anticipate that kind of with the availability of this space, that kind of explosive growth to continue. Hoping that we don't have another pandemic, hope that we don't have a world war, hope that we don't, whatever the crazy things are out there that no one can project. So anyway.
So let me just make one other comment, Steve. You're absolutely right about the explosive growth, but all the more reason that we need to invest, and we are investing in this planning. Because we know from our last study with the Development Commission that the growth is going to come, and the development of all this 20,000 acres that's undeveloped will take place. How important it is and how valuable it is to have a plan in place for this kind of development, because ultimately we're not just looking for a dollar return. We are, but our charge is to also create a place that facilitates long-term sustained economic growth through jobs. Anyway, I don't want to make a speech, but Jim, again, I'll say to you, I don't mean to be dismissive. It's a really good point, but I my own just one voice on this is that we need to forge and move forward, and we'll deal with those issues with the legislature as they come, and I may or may not be there, but I think this is a solid plan, and we need to continue.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I don't like the
This
plan.
is April.
I just, I think we're going forward in a good way. I just think that, at some point we've got to make decisions. And as was mentioned, some of that the development will move faster depending on the residential element, most likely. And it also will hinge on what infrastructure we put in place to entice developers. And when we start talking about putting infrastructure in place, then we're going to need to start talking about how we're going to pay that back and how long that's going to take and how it will be. And I just think that sooner or later, it would be helpful to have some expectations set, because like Representative Handy just mentioned, that blew him away. And when we want to get funding for infrastructure, that's going to blow a lot of people away, depending on whether it's really short time frame or a long time frame.
I think you're correct. And as you know, a lot of this infrastructure will be phased, but it's a good point.
This is April. I just wanted to make a couple comments. One, I love these projections and these financial numbers that are coming from RCLCO. Now, it was interesting to read articles recently about how the costs of the prison have ballooned, so there's news people listening in on this meeting and all kinds of meetings, and they've said that prison started out at 450 to 550 million and is now pushing 980 or something. But our numbers are looking really good, because that was one of the caveats that we were trying to make sure is that somehow some of this money from relocating the prison went back to the state to cover that. And it looks like in some direction, we're going to be well above that and on track. Second, so since we know that Provo is building a gigantic sports complex right down across from the Provo airport, and their intention is to have the largest soccer complex, I believe, west of Denver. There's nowhere else in the Western United States that will have such a large sports complex to do tournaments. Is there any way that we can kind of be complimentary with them or make sure that we're chatting with them so that we're not trying to build two of the same things in the entire Western United States within 35 minutes of each other? And then my last thing to point out is I think 20 or 25 years blows by fast. Although we have great growth and everybody seems to be wanting to be right around the point of the mountain. I remember back when Thanksgiving Point buildings started going in, and certainly when Adobe came in and bought that land, and we're 3 years into this already. We're probably another couple of years before prisoners actually get moved and demolition starts, and that things can actually be done. So I think 20 or 25 years will blow by, and we'll be surprised that there's probably still going to be some building going on in there.
Other comments? Thanks, April. Good comments.
Just to Representative, don't believe everything you hear in the media, and it's not going to be 2 years before the prison's vacated. So we do need to move forward.
And
I just meant by the time it's vacated and demolition and things, I think 2 years will blow by faster than people think.
yeah. Other comments? These are all great comments and important, and things clearly we have to take into consideration. And Aaron, the comment that Jim made about being able to break down the phasing as to what infrastructure is going to be required in what years or what periods, and when and at what point we can begin to see some return to offset those costs. We've looked at some of those from a total perspective, and maybe you've already done that breakdown, but being able to do that is important, and that's essentially what a developer does. But I think as we get those numbers and be able to give a fair picture to the legislature, then they of course will have to make a decision. But I can tell you, at least up to this point in time, the leadership we've talked to is very supportive.
Thank you, Representative Snow. I think we are working on our model does have a phasing component to it. I think right now we'll really get serious, I think, in the next phase about exactly how does everything work together and where do you start and which components you have to build to get going. And that'll allow us to more specifically answer some of the questions that have been asked. I will say I don't want to take over what I think should be a meeting about planning recommendations and turn it into a meeting about cost and structure. It sounds like there's a lot of interest here. So obviously, maybe we should plan to schedule another call outside of the standard board meeting to let you all dig in and think through some of these pieces a little more detailed than what we've shared them today. But does it make sense to hand it back to Pete or to Colton to keep moving with some of the planning recommendations? I can tell you all love numbers. I love them too. But I think that the cost is not the decision we have to make today.
So, Aaron, what do you need from us at this point?
I need nothing. I just want you all to have a basis of understanding as we look at some of the concepts today that we have thought about them. We aren't thinking about them in a vacuum where we have funny money that we can do whatever we want with. And, that there are some places where there may be some trade-offs, but that largely the economic analysis supports moving forward with with a lot of these planning recommendations, and that there's ways to tweak them and to play with them in the next phase of work. If there are things that this group really loves that are not as high on the economic impact list, to make sure that the project that we're putting together, will be viable in the long term and successful.
And there's an opportunity coming up in about 2.5 minutes to actually express some opinion on a couple of things that were discussed that do have cost implications. We're going to go through a little survey and just to get your pulse at this, after hearing all of this. And so we're looking forward to seeing what you think about some of these components now that you realize that there are cost implications to some of them.
It's a really good segue. So I'm going to go back to Alan and ask you to comment on anything where we are, at least where we are thus far, and maybe a lead into item number 2 that Steve is referring to.
Thank you, Representative. And that was a good discussion, and I think really important issues that are out there that we have been and will continue to wrestle with. If we want to accomplish the purpose of this meeting and get your input on the recommendations to carry forward into stage 3, I think we'll turn to the survey that we've got set up. And let me just tee it up with a couple of thoughts. First of all, this is designed to facilitate discussion, not reduce it. So we think that by sharing the recommendations that you've seen earlier from SOM, getting your input on it, we may find that there's consensus on some of them. And if so, we'll just move them along to the recommendations we provide at the next meeting. And that'll allow us to really focus any discussion where there's some disagreement among the board. So that's the purpose of this, to facilitate more efficient discussion. Second thing I'd say is it's kind of already come up, and that is that there are trade-offs in the decisions we make. The decision we make to do something necessarily constrains our flexibility to do other things. So in these statements that we're going to present to you, we've identified at a very high level some trade-offs. Now those are, they're again, high level, don't cover all the bases, but at least are set up to help us all think about the fact that no decisions are free, that we do give up something to get something else. And then the third thing I'll say, just as a foreshadowing a little bit, at the end of the survey, we've got a question that will ask what's missing, what concepts or elements should be carried forward that we haven't talked about. And we are talking today on kind of a conceptual level about planning, not getting into the details of what's in a specific building, but we do want to make sure that if there are other things we should carry over and build into the recommendations for the April 13th meeting, that we can do that. So Representative, if it's okay, I'll have Colton Stock from X Factor kind of give us some instructions on how to participate in the survey, and we'll move through it fairly quickly to see if we can save some time for discussion at the end.
That sounds great. And Colton, we're again happy to have you here and have your help. So take it away.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to share my screen real quick. So it's pretty simple. You just need to go to that URL listed there, pollev.com/xfactor504, and you can access this on computer or mobile. And then, yeah, you'll just be entering your responses. They're multiple choice, and then one open-ended at the end. And so, yeah, we'll start with that, and we can show you your results as we go through it as well.
Great. And so, as we said, if we find that there's good consensus, we'll just book that and move on. And if not, it'll be an issue we can come back and discuss further. But so if all of you could go into that URL, we can start the survey and move it along. Maybe just give us a sense for when you're in there so we can get started.
I'm sorry, I stepped away. Where's the URL at, Alan?
It's on the screen there where it says go to polev.com/xfactor504. You can do that on a computer or on a cell phone. Is there anybody who's not there yet?
I'm not there yet. This is Dawn. I am in a precarious way trying to connect. So bear with me one quick second.
Okay, sure.
Interesting, Alan, that none of the explanations for the questions are included.
So you can't see them when you go there?
You can see the final.
Okay, they'll show up on the screen, and so we can see it on the screen here, and I'll read them, and then they'll be able to provide their responses. So maybe while you're getting in, I'll go ahead and, just in the interest of time, get started with the first one, and maybe we'll figure out if we've got this worked through. So Colton, if you'd go to that first question, please. The first recommendation that SOM provided was to have a clear mixed-use core kind of central to the project. And as I said, we've provided a brief statement, overly simplified, about each of these recommendations and some of the trade-offs. So a more defined downtown core with higher density and concentration of services can result in a vibrant center of activity and focus for the project. This concentration, however, may draw services away from other districts and requires building construction types, kind of the higher and mid-rise, that are more expensive to build. And well, there's a box in mine that's covering the rest of the language there. May be feasible only in later phases. So that's kind of the statement and gives you a sense of the trade-off at a high level. Then we would ask you to provide your response to that first recommendation.
I have a quick question, Alan. So where we say downtown core, are we presuming that means some type of retail office, or can potentially be mixed use where people are also living there? Because my thought process is, well, wow, you'd hate to have everybody living all around the outskirts, and then you're bringing people from other communities straight to the core, which I'm thinking is the center, and there's a lot of driving in and out of there. Well, maybe it's the outskirts where you have some of your retail and you're bringing people so they're not going all the way through the residential neighborhood. So I don't really understand what the core means. Do we mean mixed use?
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about in the recommendations that SOM outlined. And so it would be more of a mixed use area. It's a place where there's a little more activity, a mix of uses, and provides sort of a center point for the entire development. That's a good question.
And so when we use that word center point, does that mean it'll be in the center?
Yes, it'll be near the center. You remember from concept 3 in the project that we showed in the last round, it had a little area around the central part that had a little higher buildings, a little more density. So we're just talking about a place that creates kind of a nucleus for the site. That doesn't mean it's the only place. We're not saying that there aren't cores in each of the districts, sub-district cores, and of course there'd be retail and housing and office spread further, but just a little more of a critical mass in the center. Okay,
thanks.
Thank you. Colton, do we have the responses yet? Okay, so it looks like we've got pretty good agreement there on something to carry forward. So we'll advance that recommendation to the next meeting. Colton, if you'd move to the next one, please. So our SOM talked about this cross-industry innovation accelerator, really a place where groups from different industries could come and find support services to build their growing businesses, taking ideas and commercializing them. So many, well, unfortunately, I'm getting black boxes across the screen, so I can't read it all, but many economic development districts across the country develop an innovation accelerator complex that provides co-working space, mentoring, capital access, conference facilities, and other shared resources. These often lead to an increase in new product development and business formations. However, such centers can be expensive to initiate and often require ongoing subsidy from the public or private sponsor. It could be that these are privately sponsored. That's something that would have to work through down the road a little bit, but potential trade-off. So respond to that if you would, please. Okay. Colton, whenever you feel like you've got the responses, you can just pull up the next screen. Okay, so general agreement that we ought to have an accelerator, but not fully on board. Looks like we've got about a third of you kind of neutral on that one. Others strongly agree, so.
Great.
Great. We'll come back to some of these that have a difference of opinion and talk about them in more detail and get your input at the end. I think we'll just kind of go through the survey now and see where we are. So Colton, the next one, please. So this is an innovation district with an institutional presence. Often innovation districts are organized around a university, hospital, lab, or other institution functioning as an R&D anchor and draw to related businesses. Such districts can stimulate development and economic activity. However, the institutional elements of such districts often require reduced land costs and other subsidies to initiate and maintain operations, reducing near-term project revenues and/or the opportunity for other amenities and features. In other words, sometimes if you've got an institutional anchor that is a nonprofit or a public entity, they may require some subsidies to help lead and advance the work of that innovation district. It's something to consider as we think about whether we have a district, and number two, who leads it and what those costs may be. But I think the recommendation from the consultant team is that an innovation district at this site could stimulate real economic activity and business spin-offs and R&D that could be commercialized. Okay. Well, that looks like we've got clear support. So we'll move that one forward. Okay, Colton. Commercial residential land use balance. So most successful innovation communities include a strong 40 to 50% residential component, although total building square footage of office is often greater due to higher densities. On-site housing is critical to energize projects 24/7 and support on-site retail, restaurants, event programming, and talent recruitment. On the other hand, residential use reduces office and other economic capacity. So there's the statement. Should we be seeking that 40 to 50% commercial residential land use balance? Okay. So there's a topic that we need to have some discussion on. All right, next. It's the micromobility circulator linked to the BRT. This is the idea that we'd have a circulator through the site that would allow people to get around easily. So the statement is, the point can explore emerging concepts in on-site mobility, such as a circulator on a dedicated right-of-way, possibly autonomous, which would provide an effective way for people to move around the site without a private automobile. Even though several systems are currently operating around the globe, it would have initial and long-term operational cost impacts with no guarantee of practical utilization. So the question is, should we be pursuing this micromobility circulator around the site linked to the transit system? Okay. So we've got a little disagreement on that one. 80% thinks it's a good idea, but we do have some disagreement on that. So we can talk about that one further as well. Okay, Colton. Retail and entertainment destination. This is the one that kind of came out of concept 2. Although Draper, Riverton, and Bluffdale have restaurants, retail center, and places for performing arts, the Point provides an opportunity for a retail, arts, entertainment center of scale, meeting unmet demand for the subregion. Such a complex would help activate plazas and squares consistent with the preferences of our target markets. However, a retail entertainment center of scale might impact surrounding city retail and use land that could be put to different use. What's your thoughts on whether we ought to have a significant retail and entertainment district within this site? Okay. Let's see that we've, again, generally favor, but some that are not fully on board with that. So, all right, we'll go on to the next one. River to Range Greenway Trail. This is the green lightning bolt going from the Jordan River to the Bonneville Shoreline Trail area. With the Jordan River to the west and the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and Corner Canyon to the east, it is natural to create a connective linkage through the project. Should it be a simple trail or larger green infrastructure? A meaningful open space extension from the river into the site, providing stormwater treatment, habitat components, trails, and passive day use elements. Developing such green infrastructure displaces land available for more programmed recreational space or revenue producing land uses. So it doesn't lend itself as well to a soccer field or a ball diamond or a tennis court. And of course uses some land that potentially could go to office space or something else. And again, these are overly simplified because we know that good green spaces also add value to properties and nearby, but something to think about. Okay, looks like we've got good support on that one. So that'll move ahead. Thank you. Jordan River Regional Park. This is that big park that was in concept 2 on the kind of the northwest side. Public input reflects a desire for a major park within the project, possibly containing various day use recreational activities, sports fields, and passive areas for habitat and stormwater treatment. 40 to 75 acre multi-use park could be located as a natural linkage to the Jordan River corridor. On the other hand, such parks are expensive to construct and maintain and use limited land that could be put to valuable use for other purposes. So that's some of what Aaron talked about earlier. I think this one is a little bit different because rather than agree, disagree, we're asking for your input on how big multi-use park in that area ought to be.
Alan, just a point of clarification on that, the park that was illustrated in concept 2 was 50 acres.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay.
So Alan, let me ask you, given that, which I think is really helpful, Steve, is anyone interested in clearing that and re-voting, or are we fine?
And this software allows you to change your votes at any time until we close it. So if you wanted to change it, you certainly could.
Well, I'm not going to do it now in front of everybody, so.
Oh, we secretly know who's voting on everything. We'll put it out in the paper tomorrow.
All right.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Next, Colton. All right, this is that Central Park idea that we talked about. All the alternatives have an open space adjacent to a central core. The difference is the size and emphasis put on a central park as a key organizing feature of the plan. Such a park could provide a place for concerts, special events, informal recreation, overlooked by restaurants and retail, and possibly include a water element. Central Park, however, uses valuable land and could be expensive to construct and maintain, siphoning resources that could be used in achieving other goals. So again, it's a bit of a trade-off and does use land that could be used for other purposes, but research shows that there's value created by access and proximity to green space too. So those are things we'd have to look at a little more carefully in the next round. Okay, looks like that's one that would be carried forward. Thanks. Next, Colton. Pedestrian priority zones. So this is areas that we had showed earlier as kind of auto-free zones. A trending preference for Millennial and Generation X market segments is for places less dominated by cars. Major projects internationally, including analogs studied by the planning team, include auto-free districts. Such districts still provide auto access and parking to buildings, but are organized so pedestrians can navigate significant distances without crossing streets or interacting with autos. However, this approach disrupts auto circulation patterns and challenges standard real estate conventions. Indicate if you agree or disagree that we ought to have these pedestrian priority zones as a feature in the next round. Okay, looks like we've got good support for that. Next. Okay, this one is a little different. This is trying to give us a sense for the relative priorities of these various concepts that we've shared with you. And so it's a matter of kind of going through and ranking these 1 to 10. I don't think we need to be perfect in this, but it gives us a little sense that when we evaluate land designated to different uses and investment toward different uses, it can give us a little sense for where you stand on that. Okay, those are our results. Okay, interesting. Okay, that's really helpful. Gives us, I think, a good sense for priorities and where we ought to be investing our time, land, money, energy, etc. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to take things off as a result, but that does help us think through it. Okay. Next, Colton.
I think
Is that the responses, or is that just the starting slide?
Yeah, that's correct. Here, I'll share one more.
Okay, this one is the final catch-all kind of. We've talked about a number of components that we could move into that final plan, and wanted to make sure that we're getting from you any additional recommendations that you'd like us to carry forward. This, of course, is not your last opportunity, and we can talk about it a little bit more at our next meeting next week. But if there's some things that we really need to do, we can put them. So there's one for heliports. Actually, we had a meeting with State Aeronautics last week talking about that, and we're going to be getting in touch with some of the CEOs of the companies that do it, and the former head of FAA, who is now a consultant in that industry. So yes, that's certainly something that we'll be looking at in detail. Probably won't show up on the next round, the phase 3, but it will in subsequent sessions. So looking at headquarter campuses, where it would go. Yeah, that's an important piece. And one of the things I'd just say on that is we're trying to build this framework master plan in a way that's flexible so that we could accommodate that. We actually had a meeting this morning with a group that wants to build a life sciences center at the point and have a plan that they shared. And we're reaching out to kinds of companies we would like to target to this site to get their input on the planning and the kind of space that they might need, kinds of things they'd want to see around them. So yeah, as we start to refine the concepts and get into specific proposals, those will have to be accommodated in the plan. Really good point. Okay. Looks like that may be it. If there are others, we'll capture them and move them on. But so I'll tell you what I saw and just my quick notes. A lot of support for urban core, innovation district with an institutional presence. The range to river connection, got some input on the size of the multi-use park. Good support for Central Park. The ones that probably need a little more discussion was the cross-industry innovation accelerator. We had nobody disagreed, but about a third of those that responded were neutral on that. The microcirculator, I think 80% agreed, but there was 20% that disagreed on that, and it'd be good to know why. On the land use mix, again, we had some disagreement on whether we ought to have that balance of residential and commercial on the site. And then the retail entertainment district, as I recall, I think we had, again, nobody was against it, but 40% were just neutral on that. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but it'd be good to get a little further input on some of these to decide whether we ought to be carrying them forward to the next meeting for a decision. So let's kind of take them in this order. Let's talk first about that land use mix, having about 40 to 50% residential. And again, there was some disagreement on that. I think as we outlined at the beginning in terms of the recommendations, that was something that has come out of the analog projects that we studied and the research that was done. And we found many of the districts that started out as all office and commercial have retrofitted because without a residential presence, they weren't succeeding as they hoped. There's some value in providing energy to the site, workers, attracting talent, et cetera. But it is a use that isn't office, isn't commercial. And so anyone who wants to share their views on that piece? Maybe those that disagreed with that land use balance that may want to describe why and start a discussion.
Yeah, I'll tee it off here, Alan. I marked that very low. I never have envisioned that kind of a density of a residential mix. I mean, I have a little bit of a view of the residential opportunities there in neighboring communities in Draper and South Jordan, and the two mayors would be up on it way better than I am. But I just don't see that as that it should be that big of a mix. I certainly willing to have the discussion, but I'm not convinced.
Great, thank you, Representative. Appreciate that. Anyone else want to share their thoughts?
So let me follow up, Representative Haney. I think I understand what you're saying, but would you suggest that that we shouldn't allocate any to residential, or just a reduced figure? Or?
Mike Lowry, that I think we were talking that 40 to 50%. I can't see that at all.
I mean, something less than that. You would.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I'm asking.
Right, 20%.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate that perspective. Anyone else that wants to weigh in on that issue? Okay.
I just have a question. I have a question. When we talk 40 to 50%, are we talking of the entire acreage, or are we talking about once we take out like developable, like once we figure out developable acres, 40 to 50%? I mean, clearly we have affordable housing problem in Utah, and we need housing, and we don't know how office space is going to change over the years with the pandemic and a lot of people just working out of that home. So that residential is actually technically mixed use. We considered it a residence, but they're really working from home. So do we count it as both? So I don't really know what the 40 to 50% means.
It refers to the net developable acres.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so that's not unreasonable, because by the time you took total acreage, it would be a lot less than 40%.
Correct.
I think generally the developable acreage is somewhere around 330 acres. It varies with each of the concepts. So it'd be 40 to 50% of that. And
yeah, so that's like 120 to 165 acres. That would not be surprising to me if that much is residential.
May I ask our consultants, Aaron and Peter, is the mix of residential, is there a relationship to that to the viability of the other things we're trying to accomplish with respect to the commercial? Do you understand my question? Is there a correlation, and can you help us with that?
Yeah, I could, maybe Aaron can speak to the retail side. I can speak to I think the trends that we're seeing around innovation districts. There is a need for workforce housing. Oftentimes, housing is out of the reach of entry-level tech employees. The second, I think, factor in considering housing is the traffic generation. We know from our traffic modeling that the greater the reduction in housing percentage, the more traffic is generated, because people have to live elsewhere and drive in. So I know on the face of it, housing may not seem like an innovation district land use, but from our anecdotal research and what we're seeing in the industry, it absolutely is critical to the success of these districts. But I think Representative Handy's right. We can look at different percentages.
I would add to and then reinforce what Pete shared. You know, our research on innovation districts from a real estate perspective, as well as from interviews with people who have built these districts in the past, is that residential and especially multifamily is a really critical component for them to succeed. And every district that's tried to be all office or all innovation has come back and retrofitted with residential so that they could attract the companies that they wanted to attract. And if you look at somewhere like Amazon's new campus in my backyard in Crystal City, just outside of DC, one of the factors that drove their location there was that there was significant opportunity to continue to add residential and other amenities within that area. You know, they wanted to have that mix where their employees could live nearby and some of them could walk to work if they wanted to, as well as living in the surrounding community, right? They really need both. They can't just deal with one. It also will impact your retail support on site. You know, residents are one of the main drivers of retail demand. And, while some of those entertainment components that I think people are really excited about, might be supportable, without as many on-site residents. We do that on-site residential is what drives that base retail performance, and we'll have to scale back those concepts if we really significantly reduce the residential component.
So I just have one other question. Can you maybe you're reminding me or us of the three concepts, what was the percentage in the most economically driven concept? What was the percentage of residential?
So in concept 3, wasn't that about 40%?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me look. I'll get those. Let me look those up. But yeah, that's basically correct, Alan.
Just a comment for fun here. I'm going to say this. Thou almost persuadest me, but not really. Up in my neck of the woods, Caltrans has a big development called Station Park, and there's housing and residential on the outside of it, but it's certainly not part of the development, and it's highly successful. I mean, but I'm not in your space, you know, that's what we're paying you for, but you know, that's to have these continued discussions. But
You said Caltrans, Steve?
yeah, Caltrans, it's funded by the California retirement fund.
But it's in Utah.
It's in Utah. It's called Station Park in Farmington, Utah.
I see.
As I hear, your suggestion is that a lot of that residential need could be accommodated in areas surrounding the site, not necessarily on the site.
That's what I'm throwing out this afternoon, Alan, but you know, we're just having a discussion.
Yep. Thank you. It's great.
And I echo some of what Representative Handy's saying with respect to the mix. I don't mind if it goes down residential, if it goes down to 40 or something like that. I think I understand what he's saying, and I think that would be fine. I certainly don't think it should be a housing centric place. I think I've said that plenty of times, but some of it's got to be there to work. But I don't mind if it goes below 50 that way.
Right.
One statistic just to give you guys a sense of scale. So Station Park is 62 acres.
Okay.
What was that, Aaron? I didn't hear.
Station Park in Farmington, which Steve was mentioning as kind of an example that really focused on jobs and commercial, but the residential on the outside is only 62 acres.
Okay.
And Representative, I know we're about out of time here. I guess I'd take direction from you and the board as to whether we want to continue to the other 3 items or move on.
Here's our challenge, board members. Our anticipation or plan is that we would put this matter on the agenda for our regularly scheduled meeting next week, and be able to refine the concept so that we could move forward. Let me ask, what are the 2 remaining issues, Alan? Excuse me.
So there are 3. There's one that has a disagree on it. It's the microcirculator, where we had 80% that agreed and 20% that disagreed. And then we have the cross-industry innovation accelerator and the retail entertainment district. Nobody disagreed with either of those, but we did have a significant portion of the board that voted neutral on that.
Well, I'm going to offer a suggestion given the time, because I've really tried to hold us to the 2 hours. I'm going to ask those who were the divergent views on those issues, if you would reach out to Alan and talk about those issues so that he understands them, and you can reach out to anyone, frankly, if you can communicate to the entire board. In fact, really, that's the better approach. If you would do that and express your concerns on those issues. And Alan, maybe you could get us an email just reminding us of what that divergence was.
Sure. Be happy to.
And then when we come back next week, let's see if we can close the gap on those or come to some understanding. It sounds like on the issue of the difference on housing percentage, maybe Representative Handy and Mayor Walker and others, maybe we can reach a compromise on that. And maybe we can on some of these others and come out of the meeting next week after giving it some more discussion and have a plan to move forward. Is that agreeable with everyone?
This is Mayor Ramsey. If you don't mind, I sent Alan a text. So I was the vote that's the one that's holding us up on the circulator, but it was by accident because I picked up my phone and my thumb hit the wrong vote, not the vote I wanted. And I tried to change it and it wouldn't let me change it. So there is not a dissenting vote on the circulator.
Okay.
I'm supportive
All right.
of the circulator. So erase that from the concerns.
I knew I liked you, Mayor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
So that takes care of that one. Anyone else want to confess a bad vote or something? All right. So we'll take that one off the board. That helps us, I think. And as to my recommendation for how we handle the balance of the issues after we receive an email from Alan, is that agreeable? Okay, I see everyone apparently nodding or no objection. So Alan, if you don't mind helping us with that, and let's feel free to have a dialogue on those issues if you choose to. But I know that we're going to be able to, I think, resolve these issues. And by the way, Aaron or Peter, if we need additional context or ask you to weigh in on your understanding on some of those issues, if we need help, I'm hoping you'll be available to help us do that by email. Okay.
Absolutely.
Bye. All right. Well, let's plan on that. And Alan, we'll look for your email helping us see those issues and see what the difference was, and see if we have a chance. And I may reach out to some of you if it's okay. And Steve Handy, Steve, I won't twist your arm too hard. You're too far away now, so. All right. Is there anything else, Alan, that I'm missing that we need to talk about?
No, I think that's it today. And I just really appreciate the participation and the engagement. It's been very, very helpful.
I echo what Alan said, and I say it every time, but this is a working committee, and you're all great to be here and to engage. So thank you very much. With that, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Representative Haney. It's moved to adjourn. Do I have a second, or was that you, David?
Second.
Okay, you're all making the motion, and some of you have seconded, and so I'll place it for a vote. All in favor that we adjourn, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. We're officially adjourned. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you again online next Tuesday. And in the meantime, look for your communication from